Well, hello everyone. We are on week 10, and this week we're going to talk about something called the balanced scorecard. And way back when, in the syllabus, you noted that I gave you an option of doing your strategic planning term project using the balanced scorecard approach. I don't know if anybody actually took me up on that. I can't remember, but anyway, we want to talk about what this approach is about this week and see how it fits in with the other approaches we've looked at. Well, this is where we're at, and what I want to emphasize here is that I've tried this semester to expose you to some different ways of looking at strategic planning. I tried actually for the first time this semester. I used this workbook by Bryson and Alston, which I think is a really fine workbook that you can employ in the future if you enter into a strategic planning process within an organization that you're involved. And in the previous years, I've used Bryson's larger book, and you note that we've read a lot of excerpts from Bryson's larger book. And Bryson really is one of the recognized experts in nonprofit, specifically nonprofit and government organization strategic planning. He is looked to by all kinds of people. He's done a lot of consulting in addition to being a college professor and focusing on nonprofit for a number of years. So he is one of the recognized experts in strategic planning for nonprofits. But we also talked about Mark Moore's strategic triangle, and Moore came up with this really sort of elegantly simple basis of looking at organizations called the strategic triangle. And again, I think I mentioned this in an announcement message after the week we talked about the strategic triangle. But I really do think that if you're just starting a strategic planning effort within an organization, if you're the person in charge of that, I really think you ought to look at the strategic triangle as a basis for starting. We used a lot of the other approaches from Bryson. Specifically, we talked about mandates. As you recall, we talked about identifying stakeholders. We talked about performing strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and challenges exercise. And I do think all of those are useful as well. But I really think Mark Moore's strategic triangle is a really fine place to start for an organization, just to get people talking about, how do we bring value to the public? What are our issues of legitimacy and support? What are our issues of capacity? And it's for that reason that you have one more written paper on using the strategic triangle, because I just think it's a really good tool for you to get a grasp on. And then a few years ago, I actually discovered Jen Lockman's website and her YouTube videos, and I think that she also, like Moore, has a very sort of elegantly simple approach to strategic planning. And Jen Lockman, she's made her career in really focusing on small nonprofits. And so all of that is to say that no one has a corner on this market when it comes to strategic planning. Everyone has a slightly different approach, and all of these approaches are worth exploring. Now, this week, I have one more that I'm going to present to you, and that is something called the balanced scorecard. And it was innovated by Robert Kaplan and David Norton. And so this week I have you read an article by Kaplan, and I'm also inviting you to look at a couple of YouTube videos by Professor Kaplan where he talks about how he came up with the balanced scorecard. So let's talk about this thing and figure out what it is. So before we do that, we're going to talk about the balanced scorecard this week, as I said, and next week we're also going to talk about the balanced scorecard a little bit more. We have exactly three written assignments left, due on October 31st. So you might want to finish it before you go trick-or-treating or your costume party or whatever it is you're doing. Is the second short analysis paper. And again, I want you to use the strategic triangle, Moore's strategic triangle, to analyze an organization. Then the last two written things that are due have to do with your term project. So November 21st is your term project outline, and then December 16th is the final term project paper, which is worth 75 points. And so let me just take this opportunity to remind you about what the term project is about. I've had a couple of questions about the interviews. I hope all of your interviews are going well. Your term paper is designed to be more than a recap of your organization. You ought to be finding additional sources to learn about your organization. And then certainly you need to be using all the materials that we have used this semester in class, all the resources I've provided you to actually analyze the organization within the framework that you've chosen to analyze it. So if you're doing a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, challenges exercise for your organization, for example, you probably did ask in the interview, what are some of your strengths? What are some of your weaknesses? But you ought to be analyzing in a deeper way than that. You really ought to be using information about the organization that you glean from other sources, and you ought to be exploring, hey, what's behind the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, challenges exercise? How do I see this organization? You may see strengths that the key member of that organization doesn't see. You may see weaknesses that the key member of that organization doesn't see. And so the purpose of the paper is for you to analyze the organization. One of the sources of data, a big source of data, is the interview. It's not your only source of data. So just keep that in mind as you approach the term project outline and the final paper. And so the reason I have people do this term project outline, actually the reason I had you do the proposal, the reason I had you do the interview plan, the reason I have you do the outline is because I've had the unfortunate experience in the past of students really waiting until the last week, finals week, to really write their paper. And I say that's unfortunate because it really doesn't net good results. So that's why I have you do it in these chunks. So really, by the time you get to writing your paper, you really should have it well in hand. That's my hope. And then that final paper will be due on finals week. And so we have 5 discussions left, including this week. So really, we're more than halfway through the semester, and the semester is rapidly coming to a close. So what's this balanced scorecard thing? Well, in the reading, you're going to see a diagram that looks kind of like this. Kaplan and Norton came up with this idea of the balanced scorecard, and they said what we're really all about here is we're translating vision and strategy into action. And so to do that, they came up with these 4 perspectives that every organization has. So if you look at an organization, there's different ways you can consider the organization. You can look at an organization from the perspective of its financials. So in other words, to succeed financially, how should we appear to our stakeholders? So that would be a for-profit perspective. But you can apply it to a nonprofit. So to succeed financially, how should we appear to those who might consider donating to our organization? And then you have the internal business process perspective. So to satisfy our supporters or our shareholders, what business processes should we be using? Are we efficient? Are we effective? What do people look at internally? If you're a nonprofit, is somebody going to give us a lot of money if they perceive that we cannot run the business processes within our organization? And then you have the customer perspective. So what is it our customers or our clients expect? What is their perspective on our organization? And then you have this thing called the learning and growth perspective, and that really applies internally to our employees, or perhaps our employees and our volunteers if we're talking about a nonprofit organization. What is their perspective? And how do we train, for example, our people to meet these other perspectives? So really, what this is it's a strategic management system, and it's also a tracking system. So it enables the organization to set and track and achieve its business strategies. Because you can think of a nonprofit as a business. It's not necessarily trying to make a profit, but it has to have some business perspective to it. So Kaplan and Norton really did develop the balanced scorecard for profit businesses, but it has migrated to nonprofits. And so it's based on setting up objectives, measures, and targets and initiatives across these 4 perspectives as I just discussed. So all of these 4 perspectives lead to the idea that we are creating some kind of value proposition for our organization. So you hear that word value. Again, think of Mark Moore's strategic triangle, right? Mark Moore said, we're creating public value. He said we did it through, the legs of capacity and the other leg of support and legitimacy. But look at these 4 perspectives. Are these another way of looking at that same idea of a value proposition? So let's kind of just really brush on these perspectives. What are they? So, okay, the financial perspective in what is it? It's profit maximization, or perhaps in a nonprofit, financial health. So classic measures of your financial perspective in a nonprofit. What do nonprofits look at? Well, they look at donations. They look at expenditures. They look at operating to expense ratios. They look at mission to overhead ratios. In one of the announcements, I gave you some resources like GuideStar and Charity Navigator. What do these organizations look at? One of the key things that those organizations look at is how much of a nonprofit's revenue do they spend on overhead? How much do they spend on fundraising? How much do they spend on mission? So if you have an organization that, say, you start a nonprofit that provides free tutoring for at-risk students, well, somebody donating to your organization is going to want to know, okay, how much of my $100 that I gave you is going towards buying books for these students that you're working with? How much of it is paying some staff who directly work with the students? And how much of that money is going towards just your fundraising effort? So it's not that fundraising is unimportant, but people will want to know what's your ratios. Okay, so I beat that dead horse. The customer or client perspective. Typically, an organization has targeted customers and market segments, either for profit or a nonprofit, right? My construction company I talked about a couple weeks ago that specializes in building custom kitchens. I'm not trying to build retaining walls for people, so I'm not gonna go out looking for what people who want retaining walls are all about. I'm going to want to know what the people who want custom kitchens are all about. So I'm going after customer retention. I'm going after new customer acquisition. I'm going after profitability. And so if I have a nonprofit, what is the perspective of my typical customer or client? You recall we talked about the Durham Museum in Omaha, which is a history museum. They have to understand who are the typical people walking through the door, and how do they want to understand the perspective of those people. How do they want to understand the perspective of teachers who perhaps bring their students on field trips? Things like that. So they need to understand the perspective of their customer. And then learning and growth. This really speaks to how the training program that you have and the performance system that you have within your organization, how does it support your strategic plan? How do employee motivation, how about employee retention, training, skills alignment, how do those things support your strategic plan? Do they seem connected, or do they seem disconnected? You know, you've all had this experience, I think, and so have I, of going into retail stores, for example, where, you know, people seem disconnected from the business. Like the person who's the cashier might know nothing about the business. So is that really good for the business? You know, there's a particular grocery store chain in the Midwest here. I think you know who they are. They talk about having a smile in every aisle. Hy-Vee. Well, actually, you know, I've known people that have worked for that company, and you know, they have something in that company called smile training, believe it or not. They actually focus their employees on that, and they have secret shoppers who come in and to different departments, and if an employee is actually not responding in the way the company, the corporation wants them to customer queries, that employee actually has to go to what they call smile training again. So they're connecting, you know, their motto really in that case to employee training. And so finally, the internal business perspective, right? So this speaks to things like efficiency, cost, quality, cycle times, innovation. You know, think of a nonprofit that wants your money, but they're very inefficient from a business standpoint. You know, are you going to give your money to them? So these are the 4 perspectives of this balanced scorecard. So I'm back at the diagram here. So what I want to focus on now is right in the middle, where it says vision and strategy. So the point that Kaplan and Norton are trying to make is that your overall vision for your organization, your overall mission, your overall strategy for your organization is the center of all these perspectives. And so what is your organization all about, and how do you use these perspectives to support that strategy? Your training of your employees and what you expect of your volunteers ought to be connected to your strategy. Your internal business processes ought to be connected to your strategy. Your financials ought to be connected to your strategy. The kinds of customers that you're trying to attract, the kind of clients you're serving, that ought to be attracted or connected to your strategy. So to the extent that you kind of get off track, if you will, you get off mission, and this happens a lot with organizations, then you're using resources to approach these 4 things, these 4 perspectives that really don't connect to your strategy at all. So what we're doing this week, again, I said we're going to do this twice. We're going to talk about the balanced scorecard this week and next week. So next week, let me jump to that. Next week, I'm actually going to have you use the balanced scorecard one more time to talk about your term project organization. So you can see I'm really trying hard for you to keep that term project organization in the forefront of your thinking, and I'm trying to get you to think about that organization from a lot of different perspectives. So I think that helps you actually when you come to writing up your term project. But this week, we're really just going to have a very short discussion about what these perspectives are, and I'm going to base this on the reading and what you saw in the YouTube videos with Robert Kaplan. So, we want to talk about what these perspectives are, how they're deployed, and how they differ, maybe in a typical nonprofit versus a for-profit. So that is the approach we're taking this week. We're talking about the balanced scorecard. And again, my final word on this is think about the ground we've covered already in this semester, and think about the different approaches to strategic planning. we are not, in myself included, none of us are strategic planning experts. But my hope really for this whole semester is that I'm helping you populate this mythical toolbox that you have, that you can use these tools in the future if you are asked to become the strategic planning guru, for example, in your organization. And honestly, you never know when something like that is going to happen. So that's our approach this week. Let's have fun with this discussion talking about balanced scorecard, and I'm looking forward to your inputs as always. Thank you.